let's see. We should have had our full functional presentation on the master branch, and I'm not sure where it went. So that being said, let's just jump straight into working on it because we don't have a ton of extra time. But I'll describe a little bit what we're going to see when we get there, and then we'll kind of build that and let it emerge as we go. So you've got all these settings over here. We've got already some state management infrastructure built for that, just so we don't have to do everything on the spot here. And these will be used to guide a dynamic connect forward type board that can change size and kind of change the victory conditions around a little bit as we go. And the goal of the talk is kind of to introduce you to some of the core concepts of building with React and Redux. So we've got kind of some of the real simple stuff done already, some rendering components and things like that. And I'll walk you through that, and then, like I said, state management infrastructure as well. So if we take a look, I guess starting at our state management here, we've got two main branches to our global Redux tree. One for the game info, which is the settings that you see over here, and then one that we'll use for the game board. Just to kind of frame it out, I've already got the initial state for those already set. We're on the wrong branch after switching around there.
Hey, Justin,
yeah.
Zoom into your terminal.
Yes.
Editor as well.
Yes. How's that?
Okay.
Okay.
Maybe a bit bigger.
Yeah. Is that a little bigger than it needs to be? Or good? Okay. Cool. All right. So we got our reducers laid out here. One of which is populated, the game info reducer. Like I said, all those main game settings are all kind of wired up, so we can just take advantage of them. And again, if you want to take a look at this stuff, the repo's out there, and I'll show you the address for that at the end. And as we go here, if there's anything that you're thinking you'd like to see more of, or even if just like to see the whole thing from start to finish, I'd be more than happy to put out a tutorial series or a blog post or whatever you'd like. Just let me know what you'd like to see. And so we'll show you kind of the initial state for our application, give you an idea of how we'll structure everything from the top here. So for that game info, those settings, we've got two players, which throughout the system we'll refer to by the numbers 1 and 2. And then our column and row counts, and the number in a row that we need to win. And we're keeping 2 copies of these because we need the copy that the board can take advantage of to control the game for the currently active game. And then we'll fill up this next game copy as we make changes to these settings. And then, as you can see, when it restarts, we'll just copy the current game, or the next game settings over to that current game branch. And that's how we'll refresh our game. And then for actually tracking the board, we've got our tiles, which is kind of the term I use throughout for those slots that the pieces go into. The currently active player, whether the game is complete, and victory tiles, which in the event that the game is complete, will be populated with a map of our tiles that designate which tiles were implicated in the victory. And we'll use that for rendering purposes. And then we've got our containers outlined, and since that game info section is all wired up, the container is also full. We're passing these properties down into our rendering layer, and then board, which is empty and ready for us to fill up. We've got all our different action types defined in constants so that they can be referenced consistently throughout the system. We've got an action, game actions here because it will serve independently for restarting the game. Some actions for updating the contents of our global state on the events kicked off by these settings controls here. and board actions. And I debated whether I wanted to walk through building this on the spot. I would have liked to, but there's just enough in the rendering area that we'll look at that there wasn't quite time to cover it all. But all we're doing here is exposing one action for actually updating the global state, and then another action that can get called in response to UI events when you click on a given column and you want to drop a tile into that column. And what that'll do is actually just calculate the new state of the grid, whether anybody's won, etc., and pass that delegate to this update tiles action. I definitely wanted to point this out because if you've never seen this, this is a Redux middleware, and it's something you should definitely be using. What it does is gives you the ability to delegate to other actions within your actions, and also to access your global state within an action, which for interdependent state, like our board here, where we need to determine if someone won the game or not, but that's based on something stored in our game info branch, which is the number in a row that you need to win. We need that cross-branch access. So that's commonly where the Dunk middleware will come in handy. And you can see for applying middlewares, very easy. When you set up your Redux store, which if you're not familiar with Redux, is sort of your top level object that manages your global state. So that store keeps track of the different branches that are defined and curated via your reducers. And so you import that root reducer that we saw that just lists the other two effectively. And then we apply middleware to it, and then in our top level React component, we include this provider component, which is included via React Redux. And it wires your store in so that your containers can access it. And I believe under the hood that's using React context, if you're interested in looking more into how that works. See how we do on time. So then for our render components that we've already got built, for those game info settings, all pretty simple rendering components. Take a couple props for display purposes. Some of them accept on-change or on-click properties. On-change that are hydrated via a top-level game info component. And that gets those from that container that we saw earlier here. Now, so that's kind of the structure that we're starting. I know that was a lot to run through really quickly without a lot of context. Is there anything anybody would touch on quickly at this point? We good? Okay. So with that being said then, again. So while Sam's getting that set, we'll kind of talk through what we'll do next, which is build those components that interact with state infrastructure we have set up. So like you drop tiles, give you feedback that you expect as you work through the application. Lock the board down, completed a game, etc. So thank you, Sam. We're up and running again. So let's start at the board component, which needs to display some columns, obviously, and that's have this laid out. That's the derivative of our state. Column, and then row, X and then Y. So in our board, a list of columns. So let's start by just framing that out. For the variable that will populate with our rendered components. And then for each of our columns, we also want to display some tiles. I just wanted to show you that the column class is also empty. Tile is the one thing that we again, that was a pretty straightforward rendering situation. I didn't want to bore you with all that's going on here is whether or not the tile is indicated
line
the victory
in the event that the
line
game's been
in the event that the
completed,
game has been completed,
whether or not
a specific
player has
that tile or has their piece.
So that just
pushes
different CSS classes,
onto our divs.
That's one more thing that I forgot to show you. We do have some CSS laid out
already as
in a
well.
larger project,
Obviously, it's lesser SAS, but here we've just
quick
got
CSS.
some quick CSS.
So the first thing we need to define our columns is we need to know how many columns there are, and how many rows are. So we need to take some of that
information
and pull it down into this. In the Redux world, the way that the way it talks to the global state is via a container. And a container is a higher order component, meaning it simply returns proxies for another component or proxies for another component. And it has full access of the global state, and a dispatch function that allows it to create
update that global state.
So the first thing we need the tiles that we define on that board branch. So we can pass that in state.board.tiles. That structure is created in the initial state declaration return from the first time our user is called by Redux. So by doing this now, we'll have access to props.tiles
within our board component.
And another note is I Lodash imported throughout the application. That's something for an application scope. I might not typically include the service area, but for efficiency and speed purposes tonight, we'll use that. So for each of the objects held in props, we'll have column data keyed on a column index. And so let's go ahead. Each of those. And push in a column component. And the first thing we know that is going to be is its data. So let's go ahead and pass that in too. And we'll take this opportunity. Oops. To define the initial render component, which is also rendering null right now. So what we know we'll want is the tiles. Receiving column data here. So for each item in column data, we'll have an occupant number for the player that occupies that tile. And a row index. So we'll push in a tile component with an owning player drop there. Matching our occupant. Tile component set up to not display any player as owning it if that's a 0. And again, that's a situation where in a larger project we play those types of values in for convenience here. That's how we'll handle that. And we always want to give in an array a key. If you're not familiar with keys in React, any component that's held in an array and then rendered, we need the key so that React knows what to do. It knows whether or not it needs to announce it if it changes, and so it can track that component in the course of placing. It doesn't matter what that key is on the array. So we'll row index. Row index. That'll always be me. I believe we forgot that on the column. Yep. So we'll do the same thing here. Column index. And we'll render out tile. Tiles, sorry. All right.
The appropriate CSS,
The appropriate CSS class to our board, which I believe was game region.
All right, we've
got an error.
Column data is not
Column
defined.
data is not defined. Then I accessed it without using props.
I
I certainly did.
All right.
All right, and that.
Gotta fix
that.
Ooh, now we've obviously got
some sort of problem here.
Because we're
rendering a single column with a whole lot of tiles. Let's see.
My apologies.
I'm not sure
what's going on there.
Let's see.
So let's throw a
debugger statement in. We start.
Just verify
what we're seeing.
So
we do have the correct number of columns. Okay.
Let's check our CSS.
Event handler.
Let's see, and I'm not sure why we're seeing that.
We're seeing a bunch of warnings for imports. But let's look at our HTML. This
looks like a
CSS problem
because we
gave it the wrong CSS name, class name on the div.
Sorry
about that, but we should render as expected now. Perfect. We've got 9 by 7. Oh goodness.
We are
out of sync on our video. How long?
There we go.
Okay, perfect. Oh, perfect. We switch over.
It's not liking my desktop
transition. So let's
stop switching desktops.
We'll just keep those together there.
You're
still not seeing the right thing. Okay.
Yeah, there's just a
little delay there. All right. So I think that should be roughly worked out. All right. Get this where we can see it all right again. Okay.
So now
you'll
notice this is driven off of still 10 seconds behind.
10 seconds behind.
So you'll notice that our initial columns
driving number of columns and rows that we see in the board here once it's rendered. But if we change these, that's because we're not handling that restart game action anymore.
So let's go ahead and wire that up. We'll go to the reducer
we set up for our board.
And when it receives,
restart game action, it will reset to the default branch state,
but then add in
tiles based on the new settings.
So we use the state patch variable to managing the updates to be made
in our cases here. And for anybody not familiar with Redux, what's happening right now is every time one of these actions is dispatched, every single reducer in the application triggers
And when that happens, it checks the type of the action coming in, which you set manually, is the action that you dispatch. And if it matches something the reducer expects, then it will return a new version of that branch of the global state. And so what we want to do now is return the new state for that board. When that happens, all the containers that rely on those properties will notify their component, and a render will cascade and synchronize the whole application unidirectionally with our global state. So we'll start with our initial state as a base. And then we'll go over that, grab the function signature for the utility function. For getting a fresh game board. We'll copy that over. And our action included a next game setting property that we can use. Because the reducers do not have access to other state. So now we return this state patch. A new version of that branch of the state. And if that was successful, we should be able to hit restart game now. The next game settings, the current game, and our application rerun. And it worked. For the columns. Oh, I didn't restart game. Perfect. There we go. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So at this point, we've got a couple directions. What I'll do is go ahead and wire up the event, drive the game. So we'll add the click handler. It drops one of those tiles. It drops one of those tiles when you click on its corresponding column. So the column will need a function pass to it that allows it to access. That means we need to go through a container, because that's the bridge to our global state. So we need to go to our board container. And we need to add an add to column function, which can delegate to the action that we saw earlier in our board actions, also called add to column. And that took column index. We have access to our dispatch function. Dispatch board actions dot add to column. We'll pass the parameter through. And then our board will have access props dot add to column. So now we'll need to add a similar column. So we'll pass that in again to our props. And since we have access to the columns index here, we can define the function without column needing to worry about any parameters. It can just call the function and trigger the update. So we'll go into our column here. And we'll add a click handler. Now we need to make sure to bind our click handler because we're using ES6 classes. It's not a React specific, but rather a JavaScript ES6 classes practice. ES6 classes are effectively a wrapper around prototype, and it's imperative that you bind any methods that want to be bound to the context of that object. And then when our handle click function, we'll call the add to column prop that was passed in. And what that should do is add the tile into the state. And again, a rerender should trigger, and it should appear instantly on our board. However, that is not happening.
Let's check and
make sure we don't have any errors.
We do not.
And then let's see what I'm forgetting.
And then let's see what I'm forgetting. All right.
Click handler's been bound.
Oh, and we can
pull
that out. And just
I don't have it set up right now.
I don't have it set up right now.
I have used it
in the past.
Does anybody else use Visual Studio?
I have not used it for React.
All right, so
our click handler definitely triggered.
And the reason that's not happening is because we never wired it up. So let's go back to our board reducer. And let's handle that update tiles
and our add to column action. I'm sorry, the update tiles action. We'll make
a clone
of our current state. So we mutate that object. And let's hop over
that action
and grab the name of the fields that are in it.
Got tiles, victory
switch
tiles,
player control.
Switch player control indicates whether or not this was an event that should cause
control to transfer from
the only event
when that would not happen when we update some board is if somebody just won.
So our tiles will become the new set of tiles
passed in with our action.
Same goes for our victory tiles. If we should switch player control, the current player toggle. And then finally, if we have any tiles in our list of victories, the game is over, and we should toggle that in our state as well, because we had that Boolean flag for is game complete. Right, and we return that state patch. And now, we still don't see anything. We'll double check what's being dispatched. All right. And there we go. Players dropping tiles into our board. And we should game info text over here. Switch in the event that somebody wants. So let's set this to speed and player one won. Now there are obviously still a few problems with this. You don't have any feedback when you're hovering over a column. You don't have any visual feedback. Somebody wins. And you don't get any sort of different feedback in conjunction with the issue of the lack of hover feedback if a column goes up. So let's fix those issues. We've got about 20 minutes here. All right. So let's go back to our board component and our column component. And our column needs cover effects. So we'll need on mouse enter,
on mouse enter,
leave
and on mouse leave events.
So we'll go ahead and define
those.
Again, we need to bind them.
All right.
And then when the mouse leaves, we want to switch on some sort of CSS class, the aesthetics. So the way we'll do that is by managing some state in a React component is the basic level internal data management component has is private from the entire outside world. Technically, just as a warning for anybody who might be less experienced with React, you can through some PS means access the data. But if you ever see somebody doing that, please yell at them immediately and don't ever do it yourself. And if you'd like some more information, please let me know and I can point you to blog articles and different documentation to kind of help you round that out. So we'll add some state here that denotes whether this is currently selected column. And when mouse enters it, we'll set the state. True. Oops. When you leave it, we'll set that to false. Now we'll want to clean this up a little bit because there are situations where we wouldn't want to take place if the game is complete, if the column is full, etc. We'll come back to that in a moment. For now, all we need to do is change out the classes being provided to this column. So let's define that. We'll always have the column. And then if it is selected, we will also add the selected class. Now, next thing we need to do is bind those enter and leave events. And again, we just don't want those firing. So we'll take this opportunity to take these props off of the component definition. Sorry, and then we can spread them into the component variable. So we'll always have our classes. And then we'll add our mouse events. All right. We use the spread operator. Drop those props onto the component. Now we should see the hover effect. And we do. Perfect. All right. So media glaring issue is so let's clean that up. And to do that, we need qualification of whether the column is full. So for that, we've got game utils called is column full. So we'll use that with the column data passed into the component. right?
All right, and then
in
in the event
that
it becomes,
ends,
if the game ends, again, we'll also want to trigger that.
becomes full.
It becomes full. Trigger that.
So we'll also use a component.
So we'll also use a component
props
to receive props.
And what that does,
And what that does is have a trigger for us every time
receives
the
new
component
props
receives new props from the outside world.
call set
And you
state
can
from
call
within
set state from within this function without triggering an additional render cycle.
So again, if our column is full, we want to make sure that this column is not considered selected. And we can call that without worrying about currently selected, because if it's currently selected, React isn't going to trigger a re-render anyway. It'll check to make sure that something is actually changed. So now we should see that when we fill up, we lose our effect. We can't hover back into it to get the effect back. So the next obvious problem, again, if we just real small here to demonstrate it, is that theres no feedback on the board when somebody wins. So that's the next thing that we'll fix. Our tiles are set up to accept that was winning tile property in addition to the owning player number property. So if the game is complete, we can pass that in, inform the tile that it should render. So again, for the column to tell the game, it'll need that information from the board, which will need it from our global state. So we want to go back to the container and add that information in. So we've got that again on our state branch of our state. Let's see. So we can go ahead and pass that information down to the column. And let's think about how we want to do that. Let's go ahead and just pass that property down directly. All right. So now, when we receive our props, we want to deselect the column if it has become full. And I'll drop this to a different line, kind of zoomed in here. Or if the game is complete. And we'll do the same thing. All right, so now no longer see hover effects if we completed the game. Anywhere. Perfect. So now the last major thing that we need to provide that feedback in the event. We want to dim out the board and highlight the winning tiles. So for that, in our board here, we have victory tiles that we can pull in. We'll pass those straight in. And then the column form the tiles of whether or not any given tile, a victory tile. So to do that, we'll want to check column index and the row index against our list of victory tiles to see that tile is
a victory tile,
We
obviously.
also need that
We
column,
also need that column
not currently passed.
not currently
We'll pass that in
passed.
as
So we'll
well.
pass that in as well. Index, rather.
And I'll also note
And
that
I'll also note that I have not been finishing props just because we've been a little short on time.
for anybody who's not
For anybody who's not
props,
using default props, you can
here,
see
for example, on my
here,
tile,
for example, on my tile, define these alongside the component
and what
definition.
that'll do,
And what that'll do is
something happens with the
happens with the props and they get out of sync, nothing will happen to your application at runtime. I don't have any experience forcing those for runtime. Presumably, you can configure it so that it would trigger errors, but you wouldn't, certainly you could, but you don't want it to probably. But what this will do is trigger warnings.
And so this is
really useful for the development process, especially if you're working on a larger team where you're doing a lot.
that is prop type.
That is prop type.
I've been saying
the wrong word for the last.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Prop
types. So for all of you who have been wondering what this default props thing doesn't exist,
but you can use prop
but you can use prop types.
So
what that'll do is it'll trigger a warning in your tile or in your console a runtime
if you've got
that configured.
Pardon me?
Yeah.
Yes.
And you're absolutely right. You should be required as it was when.
Right.
Right.
And so that's
an important note too. If
you always
want the prop provided, you definitely want it to be required. And that'll trigger a warning if it's not provided at all, as well as it is provided and it's the wrong type.
So any
questions?
prop
types, not default props. Okay.
Cool.
So
we'll
bring our column index down into our column.
We
want to check that
with the row index
to determine
whether
the tile
is
located in a victory.
And
we are passing
victory
tiles in as well.
And again,
just for convenience, low dash here. So
victory
if the victory tiles include this path through the object, because again, those are stored as a two-dimensional object, holding the X for the first key, and then the second dimension key on the Y value.
So it
has the path through that object, XY value of this tile. Then we'll want to add our tile. So we'll go ahead
and do the same thing
we did for our other component, for our board component. And that was our column. So we'll pull the props out. So we'll have our tile props
in an object
that we can spread into the component.
And then if that tile is included in the
we will also include the was winning tile property. Let's see, and we'll want to include that
if it was
not a winning tile as well. If
the game is complete.
The game is complete.
So what you should see now. Is that you get some feedback.
You get some feedback.
Oh. So let's check
So
out.
let's check out.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. Oh.
Perfect.
Perfect.
And so you can try any combination.
Try any combination. Let's
Set
set something fun up. Oh.
Let's
actually restart.
We'll
set up
multiple
victories at the same time.
If I think
before I click generally, then we will do that.
Do you want to see it?
Do you want to see it? Otherwise, you can trust me that if I was clicking appropriately, you'd see. So the one more put on that quick is currently, if we fill up the whole board,
we'll make a really small board
that we can't possibly run.
It'll be nice to see.
It'll be nice to see it get grayed out.
So we'll put that one
last.
The way we'll do
that is by
another
property or another function in that game utils collection
to determine
whether we tell the column that the game is complete.
Again, just
so we can see it on
zoomed in
screen.
And now you should
see that if we
fill up our board,
we'll get the same faded effect that we would if there was a victory.
There we go.
And there we go.
Touched on
a lot of different concepts to bring that together, and we went through it all really briefly. Again, if anybody's got any questions, please feel free to reach out to me.
I'll get my
email address out, or it should be on the meetup board if you want to look there, or if anybody's got any questions or comments now. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Redux step tools. The React ones, okay, yeah. I'm sorry. Sure.
So the containers
you mean here? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so this is
a little hacky the way it's set up, just for convenience purposes here.
Oh.
Pass my lap. No, I don't. It just seems to like getting stuck on us here. Yeah, it's not taken.
I can tell you
You've got
an object.
an object with
Got a 3x3 grid. We got
0, 1, and 2 keys, and each of those holds an object with 0, 1, and 2 because there are also 3 rows. And you would specifically see from top to bottom, left to right, it's the player numbers. It's no point saying the numbers now because you can't see the grid. You see the player numbers for the values in that second object. See, we're working on getting screen.
Yeah, it's spinning wheel of death. I don't know.
We're getting it all. But does anybody else have any questions? Or?